There are two versions of you that woke up this morning. The first is the false self, the one that worries about what people think, the one that says I'm not enough. The second is the true self, the one that came into this world already perfect, already divine, already whole. The real question is, which self is running your life right now? You know, one of the most fascinating things about the human brain is how easily it attaches to labels. From the time we're kids, people start telling us what we are. You're smart. You're shy. You're the athletic one. You're not very creative. And because the brain is designed to wire itself around repeated messages, those labels become embedded. They start to feel like facts. Over time, we internalize them so deeply that they merge with our identity. But here's the truth, none of those labels capture the essence of who you really are. They are constructs. They are stories. They are the false self. The false self is incredibly clever. It convinces you that your worth is tied to your job title, or your level of success, or how much money you make, or how many followers you have. It whispers, this is who you are. But neuroscience shows us something very different. When we measure brain activity during meditation, deep rest, or flow states, what we see is that identity, the kind of self-talk chatter that defines the false self, actually quiets down. And what emerges is a state of pure awareness, a calm presence that exists underneath all the noise. That's your true self. It doesn't need a title. It doesn't need external recognition. It just exists. Think about it if you were to strip away every label you've ever been given, your profession, your gender, your nationality, your past mistakes, your achievements, what would remain? Most people are terrified of that question because the false self has convinced them that without those labels, they are nothing. But the paradox is that without those labels, you are everything. You are awareness, you are possibility. You are the space in which all experiences happen. Here's a scientific way to think about it. Your brain has something called the default mode network, the circuitry that lights up when you're daydreaming, thinking about yourself, or comparing yourself to others. That's the network of the false self. It loves labels, it loves stories, it loves to create a narrative about. But there's also another mode the brain can enter when you're fully present, engaged in what you're doing, not worrying about how you're being perceived. That's when the task positive network takes over. That's the mode of the true self. Direct experience without the filter of, what does this mean about me? You've actually tasted this countless times when you're deeply focused on your work, when you lose yourself in a conversation, when you're in nature and you forget your phone, when you laugh so hard that for a moment there's no self at all. In those moments, you are closer to who you really are than any label could ever describe. And yet most of us spend our days desperately trying to strengthen the false self. We build resumes that say, here's who I am. We post online to remind others and ourselves that we matter. But here's the experiment I want you to consider. Imagine you wake up tomorrow and nobody knows your name, nobody knows your job, nobody knows what you've done. Who are you then? If that question makes you anxious, it's because the false self has been running your life. But if you can sit with it long enough, you'll discover that what remains is not emptiness, it's freedom. See, the false self is always conditional. I'm worthy because I achieved this. I'm valuable because people like me. The problem with conditional worth is that it's fragile. The moment circumstances change, your sense of self collapses. Lose the job, lose the relationship, lose the external validation, and suddenly you feel like you've lost yourself. But you haven't. You've only lost the mask. The true self doesn't disappear. It was there before the achievement. It was there before the loss. It's the constant in the middle of all change. Let me give you a practical example. Imagine holding an orange. If you squeeze it, what comes out? Orange juice. Always. No matter who squeezes it, no matter what words they say to it, no matter what kind of pressure it's under, it only produces what's inside. That's the true self. If you are aligned with it, when life squeezes you through stress, criticism, or difficulty, what comes out is authenticity, presence, even love. But if you're living through the false self, then what comes out is fear, anger, defensiveness. Why? Because you filled yourself with labels, stories, and conditions that don't reflect your real essence. The practical takeaway here is this: start noticing the moments when you're introducing yourself with labels. I'm a doctor. I'm an entrepreneur. I'm divorced. I'm successful. Those statements may be circumstantially true, but they are not you. They are experiences, they are temporary. The real you is the awareness that notices those experiences, that rides above them, that can't be reduced to a label. And the more you return to that realization, the freer you become. Because when you stop identifying with the false self, you stop living in fear of losing it. What can the world possibly take from you if your worth isn't tied to anything external? That's the power of living from the true self. It is untouchable. One of the most powerful forces driving human behavior is the need for approval. We've all felt it, the pull to be liked, to be validated, to be seen in a certain way by others. In fact, the brain is wired for it. From an evolutionary perspective, approval used to mean survival. If your tribe accepted you, you had protection, food, and connection. If they rejected you, the consequences could be fatal. So today, even though our survival doesn't depend on social acceptance in the same way, our nervous system still reacts as if it does. That's why rejection feels so painful, and why approval feels like such a high. But here's the catch. When your sense of self-worth is tethered to approval, you end up living in a prison. It might look like freedom from the outside, smiling faces, accomplishments, recognition. But inside, you're constantly negotiating. Am I good enough? Did they like me? Do I measure up? That's the voice of the false self. It thrives on applause because it doesn't know its own value. It feeds on external validation the way a fire feeds on oxygen. The moment the applause stops, it starts gasping for air. The neuroscience of this is fascinating. When you receive approval, say someone praises your work, or you get a burst of likes online, your brain releases dopamine. Dopamine is the neurotransmitter of motivation, of pursuit. It makes you feel good, but it also makes you want more. That's why the effect is temporary. The system is designed to keep you chasing, and if you're not careful, your life becomes one endless loop of chasing approval, never stopping long enough to ask approval for what and from whom. Contrast that with the true self. The true self doesn't require approval because it already recognizes its worth. When you operate from that place, dopamine isn't driving the show. You're not constantly in pursuit of something outside yourself. Instead, you tap into serotonin, another neurochemical but one that's linked to contentment, stability, and a quiet sense of being at peace. Serotonin doesn't come from someone else's applause. It comes from alignment, from authenticity, from knowing that you're living in a way that matches your values. Think about the difference between those two states. When you're chasing approval, your nervous system is often in fight or flight mode. Your heart rate increases, your cortisol spikes. You're scanning the environment for cues about how people are perceiving you. But when you rest in your true self, your body moves into parasympathetic dominance. Your breathing slows, your stress hormones drop, and your system enters a state of safety. That's why the false self feels exhausting and the true self feels freeing. It's not just philosophy, it's biology. And yet, most of us spend enormous amounts of energy managing our false self. We curate our image. We adjust how we talk depending on the room we're in. We suppress parts of ourselves because we're afraid they won't be accepted. It's a full-time job, and the paycheck is never enough. Because no matter how much approval you get, the craving comes back. The false self always whispers, what if they stop liking me? What if they see the real me and walk away? Here's an experiment you can try. Next time you're in a social situation, notice how often your brain is running approval, seeking scripts. Did I say that right? Do they agree with me? Am I being impressive enough? Just notice it. That's the false self trying to secure its place. And then, for a moment, imagine what it would feel like if you didn't need anything from anyone in that room. Imagine if you walked in already whole, already valuable, already complete. Suddenly the entire dynamic changes. You're not there to perform. You're not there to earn love. You're just there to be. That's a shift from false self to true self. And the paradox is that when you stop chasing approval, people are often more drawn to you. Because authenticity is magnetic. We all sense when someone is living from a place of wholeness rather than from a place of need. You don't have to announce it. You don't have to prove it. It communicates itself in your presence, your energy, your way of being. There's nothing wrong with enjoying approval. We all enjoy it. The danger is when you need it in order to feel worthy. Because then you've handed over your power. You've said, my sense of self is in your hands. And the moment you do that, you live at the mercy of other people's opinions, which are constantly shifting. The true self breaks that cycle. It says, I am enough, even without your applause. So the invitation here is simple. Start noticing when your decisions are driven by the pursuit of approval and pause. Ask yourself, would I still do this if no one else knew about it? Would this action matter if there were no audience? If the answer is yes, then you're aligned with the true self. If the answer is no, then you're feeding the false self. Over time, the more you choose alignment over applause, the more unshakable your inner foundation becomes. One of the greatest illusions the false self creates is the idea that your life exists primarily in the past and the future. You've probably noticed how much of your day is spent replaying old experiences, what you should have said, what you should have done differently, or projecting forward into what might happen. What if I fail? What if they reject me? What if it doesn't work out? This constant movement between past and future is so normal that most people think it's just how the mind works. But if you look closely, you'll see that this is the false self in action. It survives on memory and anticipation because it cannot exist in the present moment. From a neuroscience perspective, the brain has dedicated circuits for both memory and imagination. When you replay an event, the hippocampus and parts of the prefrontal cortex light up. When you imagine the future, those same regions activate almost identically. In fact, research shows that your brain can't fully distinguish between remembering and imagining. The patterns are strikingly similar. So when you're living in regret about the past or anxiety about the future, your nervous system reacts as if those scenarios are happening right now. That's why the body releases stress hormones in response to thoughts alone. You're carrying the burden of moments that don't even exist anymore. The true self, by contrast, only lives here, in this breath, in this heartbeat, in this exact moment. The present is the only place where life is actually unfolding. And when you connect to that, something remarkable happens. The constant chatter of the false self quiets down. You're not obsessing over who you were yesterday or who you need to become tomorrow. You're simply here, and in that presence you reconnect with the essence of who you really are. Think about children. Watch a 5-year-old playing, and you'll see what it looks like to live from the true self. They're not worried about how their game looks to others. They're not calculating whether their tower of blocks will impress anyone. They are immersed in the moment, fully absorbed in the joy of creating, exploring, discovering. That's why they radiate such light. They haven't yet built the heavy armor of the false self. They live in the present because the present is all they know. But as adults, we get trained out of that. We're told to plan ahead, to anticipate problems, to learn from the past. And of course, those skills have value. Planning and memory are essential tools. But the problem arises when those tools become the lens through which we see everything. The false self uses them not as tools but as traps. It keeps us stuck in loops of only and what if, and those loops rob us of the only thing we ever truly have, the now. Here's something interesting. Studies on flow states, those periods where people are completely absorbed in an activity, losing track of time, show that brain activity shifts dramatically. Self-referential processing, the hallmark of the false self, decreases. The default mode network, which generates much of our inner chatter, goes quiet. At the same time, regions of the brain involved in focused attention and present moment awareness become highly active. In other words, when you enter the present fully, you literally turn down the circuitry of the false self. That's not a metaphor, it's biology. So how do you access this more consistently? One of the simplest ways is through your physiology. The fastest route to presence is the body, because the body is always here. The breath you're taking is not from yesterday, it's not from tomorrow, it's right now. When you bring attention to it, you anchor yourself in reality rather than in thought. That's why practices like deep breathing, mindfulness, or simply paying attention to sensations in your body are so powerful. They interrupt the brain's habit of time, traveling into past and future, and return you to presence. You don't have to meditate for hours to experience this. You can pause right in the middle of your day, even for 30 seconds. Feel the air moving in and out of your lungs. Notice the sensation of your feet on the ground. Look around and actually see what's in front of you instead of filtering it through what it means about you. In that moment, you've stepped out of the false self and into the true self. And here's the beautiful part: when you consistently bring yourself back to the present, you start to notice that most of the things you worry about don't exist here. In the present, you're not failing, you're not being judged, you're not inadequate. Those are stories your mind tells based on the past or fears about the future. In the now, there is only experience unfolding, and you have the freedom to respond from awareness rather than from conditioning. When you live this way, even briefly, life feels lighter. The weight of regret loosens its grip. The pressure of anticipation fades. You begin to realize that the present isn't just another moment, it's the doorway to the true self. And once you taste it, you recognize that it's always been available, hidden beneath the noise of the false self. One of the defining features of the false self is that it thrives on separation. It's always comparing, always measuring, always creating a gap between me and you. You can feel this in subtle ways every day, when you walk into a room and immediately size yourself up against the people around you. Who looks more confident? Who seems more successful? That's the false self at work. It's scanning for difference, for hierarchy, for reasons to believe it either belongs or doesn't belong. From a biological perspective, this isn't surprising. Our brains evolved to categorize quickly. We needed to know who was safe, who might be a threat, who had resources. The amygdala and other limbic structures are tuned to detect those social distinctions, and in small doses, they help us navigate the world. But when the false self takes over, that tendency becomes your identity. You stop seeing other people as fellow human beings and start seeing them as obstacles, competitors, or sources of validation. You move through the world thinking, I need to win, I need to be more, I need to prove myself. That's separation. But there's another mode the nervous system can operate in, one that feels radically different. When the true self is online, the sense of separation begins to dissolve. You still see yourself as an individual, but you also recognize the underlying connection you share with others. And interestingly, neuroscience supports this. When people experience states of compassion, gratitude, or awe, brain imaging shows decreased activity in regions associated with self-focus and increased activity in networks linked to social bonding and empathy. Oxytocin is released, heart rhythms sync up, and the body shifts into a state of safety and connection. In other words, the physiology of the true self is one of unity. You've probably experienced this without realizing it. Think of the last time you listened to a piece of music that moved you so deeply that, for a moment, you forgot yourself completely. In that space, it wasn't about you versus the world. It was about being part of something larger, something shared. Or think of standing in nature looking out at the ocean or a vast night sky. The false self says, you are small, separate, insignificant. But the true self says, you are part of this. You belong to it, and it belongs to you. When we live from the false self, we spend enormous amounts of energy trying to defend our sense of separateness. We argue to prove we're right. We chase achievements to show we're superior. We withhold kindness because we're afraid it will make us vulnerable. But when we shift into the true self, that defensive posture relaxes. The need to compete softens. The walls come down. And what replaces it is a recognition that other people aren't here to threaten your worth. They are mirrors of the same life, the same consciousness expressed in different forms. What's fascinating is that connection is one of the most powerful regulators of the nervous system. When you sit with someone who is calm, present, and safe, your own physiology adjusts. Your heart rate slows. Your breathing synchronizes. This isn't philosophy, it's measurable. Humans are wired for resonance, for co-regulation. And when you live as your true self, you become a source of that resonance for others. Instead of spreading fear, anxiety, or defensiveness, you transmit calm, safety, and openness. The false self can't do this because it's too busy protecting its territory. It says, I can't connect with you because you might outshine me. I can't be vulnerable with you because you might hurt me. I can't celebrate your success because it makes me feel small. But the true self doesn't see the world through that lens. It recognizes that another person's success doesn't diminish your own. It sees that vulnerability isn't weakness, it's honesty. It understands that giving love or support doesn't reduce you, it expands you. And here's the paradox. The more you move away from separation, the more you discover your strength. Because connection isn't weakness, it's the foundation of resilience. People who feel connected to others recover faster from stress, adapt better to challenges, and live longer, healthier lives. That's not just anecdote, that's data. Unity literally changes the way your biology functions. So the choice in front of you is simple but profound. You can keep living from the false self, always on guard, always comparing, always separating. Or you can experiment with the perspective of the true self, which looks at others not as competitors but as companions. That doesn't mean you lose your individuality. It means you finally understand that individuality doesn't require isolation. One of the clearest ways to tell when the false self is running the show is through suffering. I don't just mean physical pain, though that's part of it. I mean the inner experiences of fear, envy, shame, jealousy, insecurity, all of those states that weigh on you and drain your energy. They feel heavy for a reason. They are signals. They are the nervous system's way of saying something is out of alignment. The human brain and body were not designed to suffer endlessly. Acute stress has a function. It alerts us to danger. It mobilizes energy. It sharpens focus. But when suffering becomes chronic, when it's envy that repeats every time someone else succeeds, or fear that resurfaces every time you think about the future, that's not serving you anymore. That's your false self ringing the alarm. It's saying, you're living through a distorted lens. You're believing a story about yourself that isn't true. Think about it when you feel envy. What's actually happening? The false self is telling you that someone else's gain means something about your lack. But that's not reality. That's an interpretation filtered through separation and scarcity. When you feel fear about the future, the false self is projecting worst-case scenarios and convincing your nervous system that they're happening now. Your heart races, your cortisol rises, your muscles tighten, not because danger is real, but because the false self has convinced your biology to prepare for it. From a neuroscience perspective, these states map onto the same survival circuits that evolved to keep us alive. The amygdala detects potential threats, the hypothalamus signals stress hormones, and the body mobilizes. But here's the crucial distinction. The false self hijacks those circuits in response not to lions or cliffs, but to thoughts and comparisons. It uses ancient survival machinery to reinforce its stories. That's why suffering feels so consuming. Your entire body is recruited into a battle that doesn't actually exist. But suffering, when viewed differently, isn't the enemy. It's information. It's the red warning light on the dashboard. It's not there to punish you, it's there to point you back to alignment. Every time you feel jealousy, it's an invitation to remember that your value isn't diminished by someone else's success. Every time you feel fear, it's an opportunity to see that your true self is not bound by outcomes. Every time you feel shame, it's a call to stop identifying with the labels of the false self and return to the part of you that cannot be broken. What's remarkable is that when people learn to observe their suffering, instead of fusing with it, the brain changes. Practices like mindfulness, breathwork, or even deliberate self-reflection activate the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain that can regulate emotional reactivity. In those moments, you move from being inside the storm to watching it. You create space between the experience and your identity, and in that space you can choose differently. For example, imagine someone criticizes you. If the false self is running things, you'll immediately feel defensive. Your body tenses, your mind rushes to argue, your heart rate spikes. You experience suffering because you've identified with the story. If they disapprove of me, maybe I'm not enough. But if the true self is present, the same event feels different. You might still feel a reaction, but instead of collapsing into it, you notice, my nervous system just got triggered. My body thinks this criticism is a threat to my survival. But actually, my worth doesn't change based on their opinion. The criticism is still there, but the suffering dissolves because the story isn't believed. This is why suffering can actually be useful. It's the compass that points to where you've mistaken the false self for who you are. Without it, you might never notice you're out of alignment. But with it, you have a clear signal right here, in this envy, in this fear, in this shame. That's where I've forgotten my true self. The false self will always use suffering to try to pull you deeper into its world of conditions and comparisons. But the true self uses the very same suffering as a doorway back to freedom. And that's the critical shift. Instead of asking, how do I get rid of this feeling? You begin asking, what is this feeling trying to show me? That question changes everything. So the next time you feel weighed down by those heavy emotions, don't just label them as problems. See them as signals. Signals that you've wandered into the territory of the false self and that it's time to return home. If we strip everything down to its essence, if we go beneath the layers of identity, beneath the stories and the labels, beneath even the habits of thought and behavior, what we find at the core of the true self is love. Not the transactional kind of love that the false self deals in. I'll love you if you behave a certain way, or I'll love myself when I accomplish this or that. That's conditional, and it comes with rules, expectations, and often disappointment. The love I'm talking about is not a feeling that rises and falls, it's a state of being. It's what you are when you stop trying to be something else. The false self doesn't know how to access that. It operates through comparison, through judgment, through separation. It says, I'll love you when you agree with me. I'll love you when you don't threaten me. I'll love you when you give me what I want. But that isn't love, that's negotiation. And it always leaves you vulnerable, because the moment those conditions aren't met, love disappears, which means you spend your life chasing it, trying to secure it, never feeling entirely safe. But the true self radiates love effortlessly, the way the sun radiates light. The sun doesn't decide who gets its warmth and who doesn't. It shines because shining is what it is. And when you live from the true self, love works the same way. You don't love because someone earned it or because you'll get something back. You love because it's your nature. From a biological perspective, this shows up in fascinating ways. When people experience unconditional love toward a child, toward a partner, even toward themselves, there's an increase in oxytocin and serotonin. These neurochemicals promote trust, bonding, and a sense of deep contentment. What's interesting is that when you experience this state, areas of the brain associated with fear and self-protection quiet down. You literally become less defensive, less reactive, less caught up in the survival narratives of the false self. Your body aligns with your true self. Love is not just a poetic idea, it has measurable physiological effects. And here's something powerful. Unconditional love doesn't mean approval of everything. It doesn't mean weakness or passivity. It means you can hold a steady, open presence regardless of conditions. You can disagree with someone without withdrawing love. You can face failure without withdrawing love from yourself. You can be challenged by life and still choose to return to that state of openness. That's strength. That's resilience. The false self sees love as a risk. It says, if I open my heart, I might get hurt. And in a way, it's right. Relationships end. People disappoint us. Life can break us open. But the true self knows something deeper, that love isn't just about who receives it, it's about who you become when you give it. When you allow yourself to radiate love, you shift your biology, your nervous system, your perception. You literally change the state of your being. Think about the times you've been around someone who embodies this. They don't even have to say much. Their presence alone feels safe, grounding, expansive. That's not charisma. That's not performance. That's the true self radiating love. And the fascinating thing is, we all have the capacity to embody that. It's not reserved for a few. It's built into the core of who we are. The challenge is that the false self gets loud. It convinces you that love makes you weak, that love leaves you exposed, that love will cost you more than it gives. But that's only true when you confuse love with attachment, control, or transaction. Real love, the love of the true self, can't be taken away because it doesn't come from outside of you. It's not dependent on what anyone else does or doesn't do. It's generated from within because it's what you already are. When you start living from this place, something shifts. The criticism that once stung loses its sharpness. The envy that once drained you begins to dissolve. The fears that once controlled you soften. Because love doesn't erase challenges, it transforms how you experience them. It gives you the resilience to keep showing up, to keep connecting, to keep expanding. And here's the simplest way to recognize whether you're in your true self or your false self. Ask yourself, am I coming from love right now or from fear? If it's fear, that's the false self trying to protect an illusion. If it's love, that's the true self expressing what it's always been. Dyer often reminded us, you are not a human being having a spiritual experience. You are a spiritual being having a human experience. The true self is eternal, changeless, infinite. The false self is temporary, fragile, and loud. So tonight when you go home and look in the mirror, don't ask, who am I according to the world? Instead ask, am I living as my true self? Because the moment you return to that awareness, you don't just change your life, you change the world.